Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto was Shinobi Ashikabi. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. Before we get into it though, check out Bilibili Comics. Bilibili Comics is the official trusted place to read hit exclusive series from top creators. Bilibili Comics is a great online webtoons and webcomics reader among all reading apps. Enjoy the best new comics, manhwa, and exclusive webtoons on Bilibili Comics. Download the app now and jump right into it. The link is in the description. Now let's start this video. It was later in the evening and the sun was beginning to set. The sky was now painted a deep orange, much to a certain blonde shinobi's pleasure, with streaks of red and purple soaring across the sky in a picture so beautiful that only nature could have painted it. During this time, Naruto and Akitsu arrived at Maze Izumo, after the blonde had used his Sannin mode to determine whether or not Kusano really was in that forest. It was surprisingly empty when they first entered the boarding house. Neither Musubi nor Uzume were anywhere to be seen, and it wasn't until Naruto channeled chakra into his ears that he heard the telltale humming of Mia from within the kitchen. Since he couldn't hear anything else, like say, the enthusiastic shouts of his first Sekirei or the laughing of the busty star-wearing Sekirei, he decided that the kitchens would be his first destination. He had wanted to start seeing if he could help out in the kitchen anyways. After removing his shoes for a pair of slippers that Mia left near the entrance so people don't walk around barefoot, Naruto made his way through the house and towards the kitchen. The only sound aside from his softly padding feet being the clinking sounds of Akitsu's chain as she walked a few paces behind him. Just as he had expected, Mia was indeed in the kitchen. She was standing over cutting board, her left hand holding onto a steel knife, as she methodically sliced up several vegetables which she put into what Naruto could tell from sight and smell was some kind of stir-fry. A surprisingly simple dish considering what she had made yesterday. Though considering just how much she now needed to make to feed everybody, perhaps it was the most logical choice until she could get more ingredients. Good evening, Mia-chan, Naruto greeted, continuing with his usage of the more affectionate chan suffix for the landlady. It was a habit he fell back on from when he had been living in the elemental nations. Back then, Naruto had never really been one for giving respectful titles or even using what many would consider appropriate suffixes. Aside from addressing Kakashi with the title of sensei, no one else had ever received a modicum of what many would consider a proper showing of respect. Even Jiraiya and Tsunade, the two legendary Sannin and his superiors, had been given the nicknames of Iro Sannin and Bachan respectively. Though, Mia paused in her cutting to turn around, affecting a look of mild surprise. Naruto wasn't fooled for a second, but decided to allow her fun. You should know better than to sneak up on a young woman like that, she scolded, still holding the knife in her hands, and making slight chopping motions. I could have chopped a finger off. I apologize, Naruto replied, his face adopting a suitable expression of regret. The look on his face was only slightly offset by the mischievousness in his eyes. Though I doubt someone who's so skilled in the kitchen would ever suffer from such an accident even if she was surprised. Well, aren't you a flatterer? Mia said with a hint of a smile, before her face adopted a look of wariness that was as fake as his look of regret. I hope you are not beginning to give in to your lustful urges, and decided to make untoward advances on a poor widow like me. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her words. It was clear to him that the woman was teasing him, which didn't quite bother him. However, he was quite interested in the fact that she was teasing him despite them having just met recently. His original opinion on Mia had been that she was an extremely kind, if somewhat reserved, individual. She would never turn someone who needed help away, so long as they were willing to follow the rules she set down. At the same time, she didn't strike him as the type to get so comfortable with a male like himself so soon, yet this was the second time she had teased him about his lustful urges within 2 days, the fact that they had only met 2 days ago notwithstanding. Still, a part of him was actually glad that Mia was comfortable enough to tease him. It made living with her much easier. If I did, I can assure you my advances would far more subtle than complimenting you on your skills in the kitchen, Naruto shot back in a dry tone, then he frowned, seemingly taking in the other part of her statement. And what do you mean lustful urges? He asked. Much to his consternation, Mia didn't answer, instead turning around and going back to her cutting. So I noticed that you and Akitsu-san seem to have had a successful shopping trip, she commented as she began cutting up a daikon radish. Though I must wonder about your choice in clothing. It is rather disconcerting to see you select such risque attire for your Sekirei. Should I be worried that you might truly be giving into your base instincts? Naruto frowned as he tried to figure out how best to respond to the woman's words. It seemed she had a particular fondness for teasing him about his lustful urges towards his Sekirei, something he got the feeling would likely be a common theme during their interactions. Currently, there were 2 avenues of attack from his perspective, the shock factor, and the subtle movements. Introducing the shock factor would be him telling Mia that she was right, which would possibly be funny depending on her reaction, but also dangerous as well for that very same reason. On the other hand, using a more subtle approach would mean he would have to wait for whatever comeback Mia had up her sleeve before being able to give in a proper rebuttal. As he weighed his options for possible exchange of wits, his decision was taken out of his hands by the topic of their current conversation. Akitsu paused as she looked down at her outfit. I like these clothes, she admitted to the Lavenderette, who blinked in surprise at her response. Oh? I hadn't realized he had already managed to sink his claws into you so far that he was able to convince you to wear clothing like that. Mia cracked an eye open as she turned her head. Despite no longer looking at the cutting board, her hands continued to move in an economical motion that spoke of long-standing experience. Taking her eyes off her clothing, Akitsu looked at Mia and cocked her head to the side. I chose these. Oh, that seemed to throw Mia for a bit of a loop. She even hesitated on her cutting for a split second before resuming her activity. She frowned for a moment, then turned her attention back to her cutting board. Well, to each their own I suppose, she said. It seemed to be the only comment the woman was capable of making. Naruto silently thanked Akitsu for her quick intervention. Even though he could not chalk up this as his win, it was kind of amusing to see the graceful landlady off kilter. Do you know where Musubi is? Asked Naruto, changing the subject that their small exchange of wits and words seemed to have come to a close. I believe she and Uzume-san are in the bath, Mia supplied with an almost absent air. She worked quite hard today while you were gone. I don't think I've ever seen someone who's quite so energetic. It was hard for Naruto to fight the smile that threatened to reach his face. Yeah, she's definitely a lively girl, he spoke almost fondly, before shaking his head. Damn it, he was doing it again. Wanting to dispel those thoughts, Naruto turned to Akitsu and said, why don't you join Uzume and Musubi, while I see if Mia-chan would like a helping hand. Akitsu paused, then gave him a slow nod. Okay, she said, and Naruto watched as the snow woman turned around and began to walk out the door and down the hall. I appreciate the offer, Uzumaki-kun, Mia chimed as she finished cutting up all of the vegetables and placed them in the stir-fry. But I think I've got things well in hand for now. She looked over at Naruto and paused, seeing the small frown on his face. It didn't take long for her to accurately interpret the look, and when she did her smile returned. But it would be nice if someone set the table for me. Naruto's body relaxed slightly. Thank you, he said, even as his legs began moving him towards the cabinet that he knew contained the tableware. I've gotten so used to living on my own that I don't really like not having anything to do anymore. The chores that he did in whichever country he lived in were some of the only constants in his life. Over time they had become a comforting part of his routine. In his youth the idea of cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking repulsed him. Now they were some of the only things that made him feel like a halfway normal person. It's not a problem at all, Mia graced the blonde with a beautiful smile. It's nice to have someone around the house who actually wants to help me. Bro, first your bloomer fetish, and now this. Uzume grinned at the blonde as she sat down at the dinner table with Naruto and everyone else. She was seated on the opposite side of him, absently twirling some noodles from her stir-fry with her chopsticks before placing the food in her mouth. Both Musubi and Akitsu were sitting on his left and right respectively, with the girl wearing skimpy shrine maiden clothes, shoveling food into her mouth like it might disappear at any second, and the ice user eating in her slow, methodical way. Mia was in her usual spot at the head of the table, her eating measured and graceful as she watched the busty Sekirei teasing the blonde. Naruto noticed with some curiosity that Kagari wasn't there. Perhaps he had been called in to work at the club again. Well, Naruto started in a calm voice. I do admit that there is something erotic about Akitsu's style of dress. Over at her place at the head of the table, Mia placed a hand on her cheek and made what the blonde was beginning to realize was her customary "oh my" when someone said or did something that could be construed as unusual. He ignored the woman to the best of his abilities in order to focus on the Sekirei in front of him. However, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I didn't choose her outfit. Eh? Uzume blinked, a string of noodles hanging out of her mouth and sticking to her chin. She slurped the noodles up, then turned to Akitsu. Is this true? Did you actually pick those clothes? Akitsu slowly nodded her head. I like them, she admitted, before she went back to her eating. Why? Pressed Uzume, placing the elbow of her left arm on the table and leaning forward as if to get a better look at the ice user, the chopsticks in her hand absently moving around as she pointed them at the other woman. Why would want to wear something like that? Akitsu looked over at Naruto and flushed a light shade of pink on her cheeks. Because it means I belong to my Ashikabi-sama. Eh? That particular noise did not just come from Uzume, but also from Naruto, who, despite himself, was equally surprised by her declaration. Not so surprisingly, Musubi did not show any shock at Akitsu's words. Also not surprisingly, rather than looking surprised, the fist fighter looked more confused than anything else, her head tilted to the side as a few pieces of chopped radishes stuck to her chin. Mia on the other hand looked more amused than anything, her eyes crinkled in what Naruto could only assume was mirth and her mouth hidden behind the sleeve of her kimono. What do you mean by that? What do you mean you belong to him? The words were spoken at the same time by Uzume and Naruto. The two paused, their eyes turning to each other in surprise. Mia giggled behind her hand. This place is getting so lively. It's too bad Kagari-san isn't here to see this. Naruto gave the purple-haired landlady a strange look, but was brought back to Akitsu when the ice user began speaking. He looked over at her just as she began speaking in her unusual way. Because he is my Ashikabi. Her words caused a moment of silence. Uzume's expression now joined Musubi's general state of confusion. Mia had actually cracked her eyes open to study both Naruto and Akitsu with an interested gaze. But it was Naruto's look that had changed the most, going from surprise to contemplative. Well, I suppose that makes sense, Naruto muttered as he scratched his chin in thought. In a way it made a lot of sense if taken from Akitsu's point of view. When they had first met she had called herself broken, a failure, because she was apparently unable to receive her wings and get an Ashikabi. Now, Naruto had no clue why this was, but when he had first kissed her to try and initiate that bond, something had blocked his chakra from flowing through her body, and instead all of that chakra went to the symbol on her forehead and dispersed itself into the air. He had been able to overcome that block by simply overloading it with his ridiculously powerful chakra, but the only reason he was able to do that was because he could actually use his chakra. No one else could have winged her. Had he not shown up in that park with Musubi when he did, it was quite possible that she would have never received her wings. When put into perspective like that, her desire to be seen as his made sense. How does that make sense? Of course, since Uzume didn't know the specifics of just what had occurred between them, it meant that she didn't understand. The busty brunette was looking back and forth between Naruto and Akitsu with a curious gaze, before settling on the ice user. I mean, I still don't get it. Why do you want everyone to know that you belong to him by wearing those kinds of clothes? Because I was broken, Akitsu's answer was very succinct and spoken surprisingly quickly. There was a firmness in her tone as well that had not been present before, ever. Clearly, this was something she felt very strongly about. I was not supposed to have an Ashikabi, but Naruto-sama gave me wings. She looked over at Naruto as she said this, her gaze just as intense as usual, only this time there was something different hidden within those steel orbs. Adoration. Much like how Musubi would often look at him, only with far more intensity and maturity. Where Musubi's adoration seemed to border on childish, the ice user's gaze spoke of an intense devotion that surpassed anything Naruto had ever witnessed. In that moment he knew for a fact that Akitsu would do anything for him, anything at all. If he asked her to, Akitsu would even sacrifice herself for him without a moment's hesitation. He did not even need the bond they shared to tell him that much. To be honest, he wasn't really sure how to take this new facet he had just learned about the woman. Naruto had never had that kind of devotion. Well, he had, a number of times to be honest. But that devotion had not been towards him so much as it had towards the mythological figures that had been based off his image. Whereas the people who had worshipped his image with made-up names and stories of incredible feats he had performed in whatever given time period it was, Akitsu's devotion was to him and him alone. Naruto, not Zeus, Jesus, Hercules or Merlin, just Naruto. And that bothered him. A lot. The knowledge that this woman would do anything he asked made him uneasy. Not because of the feelings that caused her devotion, that was flattering, but because it meant he was essentially holding Akitsu's life in his hands. Whatever decisions he made, whatever orders he gave, Akitsu would carry them out to the best of her abilities, even if those decisions turned out to be harmful to her. That kind of power, absolute power over another person, was not something he was comfortable with. Naruto had already proven that he was incapable of making informed decisions when in a position of leadership. The Fourth Great Shinobi War had shown him that. Uzume laughed after a few seconds, not only breaking the silence, but also unknowingly dispelling the disquieting thoughts Naruto had gained. She looked over at the blonde with a contemplative look. Looks like you've got a pretty devoted Sekirei, bro. Aha, Naruto gave a nervous laugh as he rubbed the back of his head in a sheepish manner. Yeah, I guess so. That's cause Naruto-sama's the best. Musubi declared, throwing her hands into the air as she decided to finally add something to the conversation. Even if that something wasn't necessarily insightful. He's so warm and kind and protective and has superpowers. As Naruto face-palmed, Uzume cast her fellow brunette an amused look. Superpowers? She said with a questioning tone. She looked over at Naruto, and her amusement seemed to increase. So what kind of superpowers do you have, bro? I don't have any superpowers, Naruto stated. Thankfully, being someone who has lived for thousands of years, the blonde had perfected his poker face. Not even a twitch escaped him as he looked at the Sekirei in the star shirt. Despite not revealing any emotions on his face, inside Naruto was cursing. He was beginning to realize that it might not have been the best idea to show Musubi his shadow clones. The girl obviously hadn't learned enough about discretion to be told any of his secrets. Damn this bond for making him trust her so much. Eh? Musubi blinked as a confused look crossed her face. But what about your strength? Naruto interrupted the girl, placing a hand on her knee to try and convey his silent message. I already told you I was pretty strong, remember? I also think I mentioned something about discretion, in case you forgot, he whispered at the end, so quietly only Musubi could hear him. Tilting her head to the side, it seemed to take Musubi a few seconds before she cottoned on. When she did, her eyes widened. Oh. The fist fighter smacked her left fist into the open palm of her right hand, as realization struck her face. I remember now. Sorry Naruto-sama, she apologized, knuckling her head with her left hand as she stuck her tongue out. Learning discretion is hard. Ha! Naruto sighed. It's fine. Just try not to mention my, special abilities ever again. Okay. Okay? Musubi said enthusiastically, loudly too. Oi, what's going on over there? Asked Uzume, looking back and forth between the pair. Naruto had been speaking a little too softly for her to hear properly, so all she heard was Musubi speaking. What are you guys talking about? And what powers does Naruto have? I just told you, Naruto replied nonchalantly as he once again slipped on his poker face. My strength isn't any kind of power, I'm just naturally strong thanks to my training. Training? Uzume tasted the word. What kind of training does someone have to do to get that strong? She asked, and Naruto breathed a sigh of relief as he managed to dodge the bullet one more time. This had been a particularly close call, and definitely not something he wanted to repeat. He opened his mouth to answer Uzume's question with an innocuous comment that wouldn't really answer her question, and would no doubt leave the girl pouting at him, dodging her question once again. However, before he could speak, his cell phone began buzzing. Hold on one moment, Uzume, Naruto said with a frown as he reached into his pocket to pull out his phone. It wasn't on vibrate, which meant he hadn't received a call but a text. After pressing a small button on the top of the Android phone, the screen lit up. He accessed his inbox for text messages, then scrolled down until he saw the newest one he received. It took less than a second to open it, and only a few more seconds after that for the blonde to read the content. His expression went blank. There was no other way to describe. 1 second his face held a look of mild curiosity, the next it was as if he had lost all sense of emotions. There were corpses that looked more animated than he did right now. Naruto-sama? Asked Musubi, no doubt reacting to the blonde's shift in personality. The Kitsu likewise looked up at him, but that was partly because her eyes had never left him. Her chains did clink, however, as she shifted, her posture going from semi-relaxed to rigid. Unlike the other two in the room who weren't bonded to Naruto and thus, had no clue why his entire body language had changed so suddenly, Musubi and the Kitsu were. No doubt they could feel the shift in Naruto's emotions, as his mind began gaining a darker tint to it. The blonde stood up quite suddenly, startling all those present. Musubi, Akitsu, he said, his voice not only far more serious than any of them had ever heard it, but also carrying a hint of command that had Uzume shivering. Lee also reacted to his tone, though her own reaction was more of a straightening of her posture and a narrowing of her eyes. Naruto did not take either of the two into account as he looked at his two sekirei. Come, we're leaving, he stated, confusing the pair, at least for a second. With her usual slow movements, Akitsu stood up a moment later while Musubi remained on the ground, blinking at him. Why are we leaving? She asked, tilting her head to the side. Is something wrong? Yes, Naruto responded, his voice tight. Something is most definitely wrong. He looked over at Mia and bowed to her. I apologize for departing with such haste while in the middle of dinner, but something very important has come up that requires my attention. Mia was staring at him with both eyes fully open now, her gaze searching. After a second or two she smiled and gave him a small nod. Very well, do be careful with whatever it is you're going to do, she said in a gentle voice. Naruto gave her a tight smile in return. I'll see what I can do. It was nearing dusk when Naruto, Akitsu, and Musubi arrived at the botanical gardens. They were standing on the roof of a building several meters from the fenced-off gate that had flora growing over it. Naruto was crouched down in a position not dissimilar to a springboard, his muscles tensing and untensing, as he observed the situation to the best of his abilities. Standing directly to his left was Musubi, bouncing on her feet in what he could only construe meant excitement, though it could just as easily be anxiety. The Kitsu on the other hand was a sea of calm, standing perfectly still and expressionless as she gazed at him while awaiting her orders. It looks like there's quite a number of guards at the front gate, Naruto murmured to himself as he surveyed the scene before him. He had already managed to count 32 guards in total, including the 5 who had taken to patrolling the perimeter. There were also 5 ATVs, armored transport vehicles with top-mounted turrets and headlights, in order to pierce the soon-to-come darkness of night. Many of the guards were standing by the vehicles, their all-black combat armor reminiscent of SWAT teams, though a fair few of them were also standing guard at the gate. It was very quiet out, much too quiet considering the number of troops in the area. Seeing such a large number of soldiers would have usually evoked some kind of response from the civilian population, be it outrage or simple idle curiosity. Naruto took that to mean MBI had managed to evacuate all of the civilians from the vicinity that was very likely about to become a battlefield. Well, if nothing else, Monaka was being earnest when he said the Sekirei plan was a secret project. It seemed that well the man may be a nutcase. and didn't seem to have any compunctions about bringing 2, or 3 in his case, people together in the form of a bond so powerful it made every other experience pale in comparison, and then ripping them apart. He at least had the right idea in not allowing innocent civilians to be harmed from the fallout of the fighting that would soon take place. It hadn't been that long since Naruto and his 2 Sakura had left the sanctity of Maison Izumo, only about half an hour. He, Akitsu, and Musubi had taken to the roofs as soon as they had gained a fair distance from the boarding house. Naruto didn't want to let Uzume or Miya onto the fact that he did indeed have powers beyond the norm after all, and had blazed their way towards the botanical garden that Kusano was hiding in. Musubi had not only been quite surprised when she couldn't keep up with him, but had nearly burst in excitement when she saw how fast her Ashikabi was. He wasn't sure what Akitsu thought, seeing as how her facial expression had not changed in the slightest, but he thought for a moment that he had seen a hint of surprise in her eyes. Strapped across his outer thighs were 2 pouches that were carrying smoke bombs, flashbangs, explosive notes, kunai, shuriken and ninja wire. The shirt he had on was black with long sleeves and a face mask that hid the lower half of his face from view, and a hood that was currently put up, covering his hair, so it would be harder for anyone to see him. A pair of black fingerless gloves were being worn on his hands. Strapped across his forearms and ankles were metal protectors with a dull black finish, and his outfit was finished by a pair of black shinobi sandals he had custom made from a retailer in France. All in all, Naruto looked like someone who was planning on sneaking into a fortress. He didn't normally wear clothes like this, even when he had been a shinobi of Konoha. Naruto had preferred his orange and black tracksuit. Times had changed, however, and with the new and innovative technologies that made spotting someone from a distance easier, he would need every advantage he could get, especially when it came to MBI. The Eternal Shinobi was not sure what kinds of advanced technology the large conglomerate had when it came to tracking people. He could think of a number of devices though, anything ranging from night vision lenses to heat-seeking goggles. If they did have something like that, where they could find a person by heat, then Naruto was not all that sure their hiding place would last for much longer. Alright, Naruto started as he took his eyes off the front gate to look at his partners for this mission, his gaze more serious than either of his Sekirei had seen from him. It was the first mission he'd had since the end of the shinobi era, and he had no intentions of it ending in failure. It looks like the front gate is heavily guarded, so that's out. We're going to try and see if we can't sneak in through the back way, or perhaps find a part of the gate that isn't guarded and simply hop over. Once inside, we'll need to hurry up and find Kusano and get her out before MBI and the other Ashikabi realize she's missing. That was the whole reason they were here now. Naruto had planned on going in a little later tonight while under cover of complete darkness. It would have helped conceal his presence much easier. That option had been taken out of his hands when he had received a text message claiming that the green girl is in the Arboretum. Anyone who can find her first and wing her wins. The text itself had no doubt been sent en masse. Monaka wouldn't have sent the message just to him, not when with the way it was worded, which meant Naruto's timetable had been raised. Now they had to move in more quickly, with less caution than he would have liked, get in, get Kusano, and get out before the Ashikabi he was positive would come came. Otherwise things would get a lot messier. If we're sneaking in, does that mean we won't get to fight? Asked Musubi as she finally came down from her high to give him a curious look. Naruto blinked, nonplussed. Of course, he said, his confusion obvious. Right now the last thing we need is to find ourselves in combat. At this very moment there was a scared little girl hiding within that depth of trees. Getting into needless combat would not only be pointless, but it would delay them from reaching Kusano, giving some other Ashikabi the chance to get her before they could. Musubi looked put out, her expression going from curious to depressed. I was hoping to fight a strong opponent. Naruto took a moment to stare at his first Sekirei blankly, then shook his head, and decided to ignore the girl for now. He didn't have time to deal with her apparent battle mania. Naruto stood up, preparing himself for the mission to come. He could feel adrenaline begin pumping through his bloodstream, heightening his already impressive reflexes and reaction time. Opening up his chakra pathways, the blonde allowed his impressive internal energy to begin flowing through his body, enhancing his muscles, increasing his speed, his strength, his power. With his inhuman chakra flowing through his body, Naruto became something more than a mere human, an entity whose power could easily keep up with most Sekirei, and in some cases, surpass it. Therefore it was no surprise when Naruto heard the crackling sound of a fireball being tossed at him. Scatter! He shouted to his Sekirei, already tensing his muscles in preparation to leap. In an odd display of synchronicity, Naruto, Akitsu, and Musubi jumped away, just as a compressed ball of flame impacted the part of the roof they had been standing on. As Naruto landed on the ground, his eyes took in the sight of impact, making an idle note that despite the power that had been put behind the flames, no damage had been done to the building. Not even a scorch mark. His eyes then went over to the person who had attacked them. He was a male, that much was obvious from the lack of chest, though he looked a lot skinnier than most men. The man's lithe frame was covered in long black clothing, and a black overcoat that flapped behind him, a pair of full-fingered gloves, and a half-mask much like Naruto's own, covered the lower half of his face. The only thing that could truly be seen about him was the silvery hair that looked vaguely familiar for some reason. I see you people decided not to waste any time responding to that bastard's message. The man, a Sakurai Naruto, figured from the large fireball he had thrown moments earlier, all but snarled. As if to confirm his status as a Sakurai, a ball of flame was conjured above his left hand, looking like a miniature sun as it flared into existence. I would say I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that would be a lie. I wouldn't be letting you three go anywhere near 108. 108? Naruto questioned to himself. Was that Kusano's designated number? Well, Musubi was number 88, so it would make sense that Kusano would have her own number as well. He wondered what the numbers signified. Were they simple designations or did they mean something more? Perhaps a measure of their power in comparison to the others. Maybe something like a rank. He would have shaken his head to dispel the thoughts, but then he would have to take his eyes off the fire user. Is it you, Kagari-san? Asked Musubi, her voice suddenly ringing from where she stood. Naruto blinked, then his eyes narrowed when he saw the man wielding the ball of fire stumble. What? Asked Kagari, stuttering over the word in surprise. The flame in his hand increased in brightness, illuminating the darkness further, and bringing more of the trio's features to light. The man blinked as he looked at the three of them, then his eyes began to widen, though he did not say anything. Musubi studied Kagari intently, before smiling sheepishly. Ah, my bad. Kagari-san doesn't wear a mask. The naive Sakurai once more did her customary head knuckling with her tongue sticking out of her mouth. Once more she didn't seem to notice Kagari's breath, a visible sigh of relief. Naruto did. Not that he could do anything about it. Less than a second later, the flame user seemed to remember he was in combat, and entered what Naruto assumed was his combat stance, feet spread slightly apart, back slouched a little. With his left hand out to his side and a ball of flame hovering over it, looking like an unstable star. For a moment no one moved. Naruto was trying to figure out what to do, while Kagari seemed to be in the same position. The Kitsu had lowered her arms, the air thickening around her into a cold mist, as she utilized her powers. It appeared the only thing that kept her from attacking was that Naruto had not given out the order to yet. On the other hand, Musubi was still studying the fire user with a confused look. A surprise considering she had been so keen on battling just moments ago. Before any one of them could make a move, the sound of multiple explosions filled the air. Two sets of eyes widened as both Naruto and Kagari forgot their battle, and rushed over to the edge of the building. The blonde's eyes narrowed as he took in this new scene. What had once been a nest of MBI troops and armored vehicles, now looked like a war scene out of a Call of Duty game. All of the troops were lying on the ground, some injured but most dead. The ATVs that had once been sitting on their wheels, gleaming and pristine, were now destroyed, smoke billowing from what looked like several large cuts from a blade of some kind. To top things off, it looked like the gates had been destroyed by those same blades, and were now wide open for whoever had wreaked such destruction. It looked like Naruto was no longer the only Ashikabi chasing the green girl anymore. He had known the moment the message had appeared on his screen, that more people would come trying to claim Kusano, but he had been hoping for a little more time. Swearing to himself, the blonde turned to Kagari who was still looking at the devastation with narrowed eyes. Look, Naruto started, his tone sharp and concise as he got the Sakurai's attention. The fire user turned to him, his left hand absently coming up to scratch his chest. I'm sure you don't trust me, and considering you just threw a fireball at me, I sure as hell don't trust you. The blonde grimaced. That sounded like something out of a corny action movie. However, I'm equally sure you don't want Kusano falling into the hands of someone who is willing to allow their Sakurai to kill so indiscriminately. What are you trying to say? Asked Kagari, his eyes grimacing as he rubbed his chest some more. I'm saying that it would be in our best interest if we work together until we rescue Kusano, Naruto stated, looking directly in the fire user's eyes, daring the man to contradict him. Kagari looked at him for a moment, grimaced, looked over at the scene of devastation below them, scratched his chest, then looked back at Naruto. It didn't take more than a second before the fire user made his decision. It looks like we don't have much of a choice, he admitted. It's either work with you or waste time fighting you, while the Ashikabi who went after number 108 captures her. I need to see things my way, Naruto stated, making Kagari narrow his eyes. The blonde wasn't paying any more attention to him, however, instead his gaze had shifted back towards the gate. Come on, let's go rescue Ku-chan before some prick manages to forcibly wing her. Light as a feather, Naruto and the others dropped to the ground, his arm around Akitsu's waist, as he pretended to have the currently lightly blushing snow woman help him. Normally, such secrecy wouldn't have been warranted, but with the added presence of the fire user, Naruto didn't want to do something inhuman in the presence of a Sakurai he didn't really know. The last thing he needed was for the man to ask questions about his abilities. The four of them hurried over towards the now decimated gate, Naruto taking the lead with the fire user on his immediate right. Behind and to his left was Akitsu, her chains clinking and rattling with each movement. On the fire user's right was Musubi, who was once again looking excited, possibly at the prospect of battling whoever had managed to cause so much damage. Naruto was honestly worried that the girl wouldn't be able to focus on the rescue, so consumed was she by her desire for combat. Now that they were not only closer but also no longer upwind, the destruction before them seemed that much more real. Naruto could see the varying states of injury that the soldiers had suffered from in one degree or another. Some had received simple wounds, minor cuts that looked like nothing more than artificial wounds. Most, however, were suffering from a number of life-threatening wounds, loss of limbs, giant gashes that sliced through their armor, and bit deeply into their chest. Many of the troops who had received such wounds were already dead. The smell of blood was thick in the air. Naruto was also able to gain a closer look at the damage that had been done to the adze, and could say with almost 100% certainty that it was definitely a blade of some kind that had done the damage, most likely a wind blade of some sort. The cuts were perfectly smooth, no displayed or frayed steel. It looked like the vehicle had been sliced in half by some kind of high-intensity laser. Just one more testament to the power these Sekirei have. The hell goes straight through the front gates. Naruto's muttered question went generally ignored as everyone else looked at the scene. Except for Akitsu, who was still staring at him as if awaiting her orders. An idiot with no sense of discretion, the fire user seemed to have heard Naruto and answered the rhetorical question. Wow, these people must be really strong, Musubi stated with good cheer, somehow not at all bothered by the devastation around her. Naruto wondered if it was just in her nature to be so excited by the thought of a fight that all other thoughts were pushed out of her mind, or if there might be something wrong with her. His question was answered when she wheeled around to look at him, stars in her eyes. Are we going to fight them? We may be forced to, Naruto said, shaking his head as he started to make his way towards the gates. However, I would prefer if we just got Kusano and got out, and do it quickly. Whoever had sent their Sekirei here obviously doesn't have much in the way of moral scruples. If they were willing to allow their Sekirei to kill in order to get what they want, then there was no telling what kind of pain they would inflict on Kusano to force her into compliance. Worse still, it was clear that the Sekirei who had done this had no problem ending lives. Naruto didn't want that kind of person coming within 50 feet of Kusano, though he was not quite sure where his overprotectiveness was coming from. Right, the fire user muttered as he made to follow Naruto. Especially since I think I know who did this, he added, causing the whiskered shinobi to look over at him. And as she's the one who was sent after number 108, then you can bet something bad will happen to the girl. Number 43 was never known for her patience. Naruto ran through the small amount of information the fire user had unknowingly given him. It wasn't much, but Naruto could infer several things from the few sentences his partner of circumstances said. The first was that he knew the people currently after Kusano, or at least the Sekirei that had been sent after her. Second, judging from the tone in his voice, it was clear that he and this other Sekirei had been at odds more than once, and the fire user was not very fond of her. And lastly, they apparently needed to hurry because the girl that was sent after Kusano was impatient and liable to harm the child responsible for all these plans, if the child didn't comply with her demands. In that case we'll want to move quickly, Naruto stated. The fire user gave him a nod, however, before anything more could be said or any action taken, a thick mist began entering the area. Naruto cursed, an action copied by the fire user, as his eyes darted around, staring into the thick mist. He should have realized the Sekirei who went after Kusano wouldn't be alone. Well, what do we have here? A voice spoke up from somewhere to the blonde's left. It was female, that much Naruto could tell for a fact, though it was difficult to judge anything else about the girl form voice alone. It looks like the guardian of unwinged Sekirei has gone and found some allies. I hope you're not winged yet. Well, we're not after you this time. I'm sure my Ashikabi would love to get his hands on you. The only way Mikagami is getting his hands on me is if I'm dead, the apparent guardian of unwinged Sekirei stated, his voice calm and collected despite his words. Now that Naruto had heard the title the fire user apparently went by, the man's hostile actions towards him made a great deal more sense. No doubt he had been under the belief that the blonde was one of the Ashikabi who came to try and forcefully win Kusano. That can be arranged, the voice said. Naruto closed his eyes as the girl continued to taunt them. She couldn't be the only one guarding the entrance, could she? It was quite possible given that there were only 108 Sekirei. At the same time it was pretty illogical to have just a single Sekirei guarding the entrance. The chances of that Sekirei being taken out of the game while you are trying to acquire a new Sekirei were high, and would defeat at least half the purpose of adding another Sekirei to your forces. Naruto didn't believe for a second that someone who was at least intelligent enough to guard the entrance and ensure no one else but their Sekirei could get in, would leave it guarded by only a single number of their forces. And so he listened, channeling chakra to his ears to see if he couldn't determine how many enemies they were dealing with, and just where those enemies were. The first one was easy enough to hear. The girl was still talking, and as Naruto's hearing sharpened to insane levels, the blonde was able to make out exactly where she was. 5 meters to his left and just a little behind his ear. Aside from her jabbering, Naruto could hear the rustling of her clothes. The others, if there were others, were being very quiet. Despite his enhanced hearing, he couldn't seem to. There, half a dozen meters to his right and near the tree beginning line of trees. Whoever they were standing on the wall. The scuffing of their feet combined with the slight squelching sound of Flora as it was stepped on by a set of heeled shoes let Naruto know that this Sekirei was also a woman. It also stood to reason that the woman standing farther from the center of action was the one creating this field of mist. Akitsu, Musubi, he called out, his mind already going through all of the information he had so far from this little meeting, and planning his response accordingly. The clinking of chains sounding from his right let him know he had gotten the snow woman's attention. Yes, Naruto-sama. Came the voice of his first Sekirei closer to the Sekirei guardian than it was to the blonde. There's two enemy Sekirei here, one to her left and another one several feet away to her right. The one on the right is trying to keep her distance and is most likely the source of this mist, he stated, and then quickly outlined his plan. I want one of you to take that woman out, and the other to take on the one to her left. Yes, Naruto-sama. Musubi shouted with a cheer that belied the seriousness of their situation. Clearly she was more excited by the fact that she was finally going to be in a battle than she was worried about possibly losing. For some reason, that kind of attitude was strangely familiar to him, though he couldn't for the life of him figure out why. Whatever, there were more important things to deal with, like getting into the Arboretum and finding Kusano before that number 43 character did. Ah, yes, Ashikabi-sama. Akitsu's response came with none of the poignant pause that usually accompanied her speech. Naruto assumed it was because they were now in a combat situation, and she likely understood what was at stake better than the fist fighter in his group. The speed of her speaking was not the only thing that was quick about his second Sekirei at the moment. The air was beginning to get cold, the mist that surrounding them beginning to turn into hoarfrost. Naruto could see the layer of thick white cloud in front of him, condensing even further, shifting and changing shape, as the icy air caused the collection of millions of water droplets to solidify into a jagged-looking dagger. This was not an isolated incident. Naruto saw, all of the fog surrounding him was turning into the crystalline forms of icy death. The constructs hovered in mid-air, before without warning, they launched themselves towards the two sources he had given Akitsu previously. What the hell? The loud shriek of terror as who knew how many jagged daggers of ice hailed down on her, came from the woman closest to the group of four. Another squawk of surprise sounded from the woman standing on the wall. Both noises were followed by what sounded like hundreds of thunks in quick succession, as the ice shards penetrated the ground. Naruto noted that in that entire sequence of noise, there was no sound of flesh being penetrated by the ice creations. The fog began to clear. Naruto assumed that the one who created it had to concentrate in order to maintain it, and now that her concentration had been broke, she was no longer able to keep the technique up. The very first thing Naruto took note of was the areas Akitsu's ice shards had hit. His sharp eyes could count upwards of 200 shards within each area, the ice that created them having been so strong it managed to penetrate the concrete, rather than shatter on impact. It was an impressive display of power, he admitted to himself. The usage of sub-elements like ice was very difficult to use. Ice was a combination of water and wind. The water was used to form the general shape, and the wind cooled the water down until it froze over. Moreover, the speed at which the technique had been formed was equally impressive. If Haku were still alive, the young apprentice of Zabuza would no doubt have been in equal awe at incredible display of ice manipulation. The second thing Naruto noted was Akitsu herself. It was clear that she had been the one who had created the ice shards and launched them at their adversaries. Granted, the circle of ice that now surrounded the woman followed by the several dozen other ice shards already floating around her, hovering like ominous knives ready to be launched at a moment's notice, would have made that fact obvious to anyone. Naruto found the fact that his second Sekirei was an ice user to be almost poetic. Akitsu was already engaged in combat, from the look of things. Though Naruto felt engaged might be too harsh a word. She was just standing there with the same expressionless look on her face. However, that did not mean she was idle either. While her body was not moving, the shards of icy death certainly were, launching themselves at both of the opponents Naruto had told the snow woman about. Each time she launched a set of shards, more would reform in their place at a rate so quick that all a human would have to do was blink before they missed it. Screw all, if Haku were here to see this display he would have shit a brick. And that was the third thing he noted. Both of the women were doing their best to not be impaled with the many dozens of ice shards that were launched at them. The first woman, the one closest to them, was a weapons user of some kind. She had long blonde hair and two pigtails on either side of her head, and was wearing a black Chinese-style dress with one large yellow stripe running vertically down the center of it. To top her outfit off, she had black stockings, high-heeled boots, and was wearing a pair of white gloves over her hands. The weapon she was wielding was a whip, and she obviously had some talent with it, as Naruto watched the weapon lash out and shatter all of the ice shards that were threatening to impale her. The other woman was tall and with long gray blonde hair, dressed in a cleavage-bearing dress and miniskirt held tight to her hips with crisscross belts, and covered all over by a light blue overcoat. She didn't seem to be doing nearly as well, dodging the hailstorm of icy death sent after her as the other one. It was quite clear that she was also the one who had created the mist. That other girl was using a weapon, which Naruto deduced to mean she was a weapon-type Sekirei. And if that were the case, then it meant this girl was a water type. Possibly. It was hard to tell, and it didn't look like she had any abilities beyond creating mist, otherwise she would have used them to defend herself by now. Also clear to him was that the girl wasn't really a fighter. Naruto watched as she stumbled slightly in her dodging and nodded. She had some speed and the inherent strength of her species, but it looked like her physical attributes were less than those of a weapons user or fighting type like Musubi and that girl with the whips. If his observations were right, then that Sekirei would be the first to fall in this fight. As if his words had prophetic abilities, the creator of the fog stumbled, tripping over one of the many ice shards she had been dodging and fell on her rear. Akitsu created several dozen more around her, all of them set to launch themselves at the downed Sekirei. Before they could, however, Akitsu was forced to dodge as several dozen strings made from some kind of leather-looking fabric that attacked the position she was standing on. The ice user jumped up and back, her ice shards losing cohesion as she did so, and landed on the ground several feet away. And just like that, the positions were reversed, and now it was Akitsu who found herself being forced into a tactical retreat, as she did her best to dodge the many dozens of tendril-like strings that seemed capable of tracking her. Naruto's eyes traced the string's path towards their user. It was girl, much like the whip user. This one had blonde hair and 2 pigtails, and looked so similar to the other one that he had to wonder if they were twins. Even her dress was similar, albeit in a different style. Where the other Sekirei was wearing a Chinese-style dress, this one's outfit was more along the lines of Western fashion, though Naruto noticed with some amusement that there was a large yellow stripe running down the center of her dress, much like the other Sekireis. For a moment, Naruto wondered why the snow woman was focusing on just dodging, and had not started creating more ice. It took him a moment to come up with a working hypothesis, but when he did, Naruto felt like banging his head on a wall. Much like the mist creator, Akitsu's ability to make ice shards must be reliant on her concentration. It was possible to create the element and move at the same time, but only if one had the concentration necessary to do so. Akitsu didn't seem to be quite there yet, at least not when it came to creating ice and moving while dodging dozens of whips. Which meant she would need help in dealing with this new opponent, so she could focus on the other two. Naruto looked over at Musubi, who was, surprisingly enough, just standing where he had last seen her. Of course, standing was slightly incorrect. While Musubi was indeed standing there, it may be more accurate to say she was bouncing on the balls of her feet in excitement. Her fists clenched under her chin, stars in her eyes as her head moved back and forth between the now 4 combatants. It looked like she wanted to battle, but was unsure which opponent she should fight. Naruto decided he would help her decide. "Musubi," he shouted, gaining the girl's attention. The moment she looked at him, he said, "Go after the one with the strings. Make sure she can't use her weapons against Akitsu." "Yes." The girl's shout was half cheer, half relief at finally knowing which opponent she should fight. With post-haste, the fist fighter bent her knees, and then blasted off the ground like a rocket. The cement under her feet shattered as she was launched into an incredibly fast run that had her closing the distance between her and the string user in mere seconds. Number 88, Musubi. The excitable girl shouted halfway through her run. The string user's head snapped over to where Musubi was flying towards her, a slow widening of her eyes to show her surprise. And then the fist fighter was on top of her, fighting with an enthusiasm that was almost endearing and more than a little unnerving. Thankfully, with Musubi now occupying the string user, Akitsu was free to renew her assault on the other two. While the girl with the whip was good, she only had one weapon to occupy Akitsu's attention. Considering the snow woman could launch dozens of shards of ice with nothing more than a thought that didn't mean much. The other woman wasn't even worth mentioning. Naruto was just waiting for her to slip up again. With the battle now being engaged in full force, Naruto decided it was time to leave. He would have liked to stay and make sure that his Sekirei would be alright, but if he stayed, then Kusano might end up getting captured by the Sekirei, number 43, that had already entered the Arboretum. If that happened, not only would their mission end in failure, but all the time he had spent finding her would have gone to waste. "Come on," Naruto said to the fire user. "Let's leave this battle to Akitsu and Musubi. We have to find Kusano before number 43 does." The guardian of unwinged Sekirei looked over at him for a moment, his gaze studying him with an intense gaze, before nodding his head. With the sound of battle echoing all around them, the two allies of circumstance rushed into the lingering darkness of the Arboretum. The air was thick and cloying within the mass of trees. It reminded Naruto of the Amazon rainforest in South America. With so much flora and the trees packed so closely together, the air was incredibly warm and moist. Already the eternal shinobi could feel his clothing begin sticking to his skin as a combination of sweat and the natural moisture from the atmosphere clung to his body like liquid skin. It was definitely not the most comfortable he had ever been, but Naruto had suffered through worse. It was also very dark. Even Naruto's enhanced eyesight did very little to help him see through the nearly black shroud of trees. While the blonde's vision might be far better than a normal human's, the fact remained that Naruto was, in many ways, still human. Without some form of light to penetrate the darkness and ensure the continued refraction of light particles to stimulate the eyes, Naruto's enhanced vision might as well be meaningless. Maybe he should begin investing in a set of night vision goggles. God, those would have been so useful back when he was still a shinobi. Thankfully, he had someone who was perfectly capable of creating his own source of light. The fire user had a decently sized ball of flame hovering over the palm of his hand, looking almost like a miniature sun as its brightness penetrated the gloomy darkness of the arboretum for several dozen feet in all directions. Once again, Naruto couldn't help but be impressed by the display of elemental control. The Sekirei with him had managed to conjure the flame from thin air, a feat that would have made any fire user back in his day green with envy. Naruto took his gaze away from the ball of flame to look out into the murky depths of the forest. Now that he was finally inside of the arboretum, the eternal shinobi had run into a problem that he hadn't really thought about beforehand, but was now cursing himself for not recognizing it as an issue. He had no clue where to go, and no idea how to find Kusano. Even when Naruto had been using his Sannin mode to see if the child from his dreams was inside of the massive trees, he hadn't been able to do more than figure out that there was a Sekirei in there, and that it was likely Kusano. He hadn't been able to pinpoint her location, or tell anything more that the forest of trees that made up the arboretum had not been created by natural means. It was times like these Naruto wished that the special chakra granted to him via his Uzumaki blood contained some of the more esoteric abilities of his clan. Karen would have been able to easily tell where Kusano was with her Kagura Shingen, Mind's Eye of the Divine Entertainment technique, an incredible ability that allowed her to sense individuals through their chakra over a vast distance exceeding 10 kilometers. It had been even more impressive because when using it, Karen had the ability to tell was lying from the fluctuations in a person's chakra made from dishonest emotions or detecting if someone, including herself, was under a genjutsu. Also, by focusing on a single chakra signature, Karen had been able to perceive its location and movement with great detail. The ability was incredibly useful, and while Naruto knew that even though the Kagura Shingen technique might have trouble sensing Kusano at first due to the girl's chakra being infused into the entire forest, he had no doubt Karen would have been able to find the little girl eventually. Unfortunately, Naruto's Uzumaki blood was diluted to the point where he had no sensor capabilities to speak of. The only thing that he had gained through his Uzumaki blood was the incredible chakra capacity and powerful chakra of his clan. He would have counted the longevity in that list of abilities, but the blonde shinobi's immortality had nothing to do with his Uzumaki blood and everything to do with his cursed existence. Realizing where his thoughts were taking him, Naruto's lips became a thin line as he shook his head in an attempt to physically dispel the thoughts. They wouldn't do him any good, he told himself. Thinking about his curse would only force his mind into an endless loop of self-recrimination and hatred. Right now there was a little girl who needed his help. He should be focused on finding Kusano before number 43 did. You really didn't know about the message that bastard sent to all the Ashikabi? At the sound of the question, Naruto turned his head to study his current ally in this conflict. The fire user, who Naruto had a suspicion of his identity, had been studying him intently since they had left the battle between Naruto's Sekirei and the other three enemy Sekirei. The Eternal Shinobi had no clue what the man was searching for, and in truth had barely even paid attention to the fire user since they had entered. Inuminaka had sent out a message, Naruto admitted after taking a second to register the question. I received the same message during dinner, however, I knew about Kusano being in this forest a day before the message had been sent out. The blonde took another glance around his surroundings and his eyes narrowed. Or at least, I knew that she was in a forest of some kind and needed help. The fire user stared at Naruto for some time, enough that the blonde had began to wonder about just what was going on through the man's head. Finally, the silvery-haired male tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. I don't remember telling you number 108's name, he said at last. That's because you didn't, Naruto replied succinctly. Knowing that kind of answer would be unlikely to satisfy his current ally, and not wanting to be forced into a confrontation when they should be focusing on finding Kusano as quickly as possible, he decided to elaborate further. Last night I had a dream. I was in a forest and someone was crying, a little girl with bright blonde hair and green eyes hidden in a tree. She told me it was her fault, that she wanted to go out and play. He looked over at the now surprised fire user and shrugged. I didn't know what she was talking about at the time. Hell, I still don't have the whole story. But I know that she's here, inside this forest, scared, helpless, alone. I need to find her. It was there again, that same level of emotion that he had gotten with Misubi when they had first met. The feeling itself was slightly different, whereas with Misubi he had felt a desire to be within Shirashir. When thinking of Kusano, the blonde felt a sense of protectiveness, not unlike those a brother might feel for their little sister. It was this very same emotion that had driven Naruto to his impulsive action, rushing towards the Arboretum without creating anything more than a basic strategy, after reading the mass text sent out by MBI's enigmatic president. Number 108, Kusano, the fire user started. Naruto had been just about to go back to his scanning when the man's words made him turn his head. She was on a day trip from the lab when an Ashikabi attacked her adjuster and tried to wing her afterwards. He once more gave me a studying look, his hand coming up to scratch his chest, and Naruto got the feeling that he was grimacing. You must be a very powerful Ashikabi to have received a reaction like that. For some reason, the fire user sounded shocked. Not that Naruto could blame him. The silvery-haired man had probably been under the impression that Naruto was like the Ashikabi of those Sekirei that Akitsu and Musubi were currently battling. Of course, he wouldn't have been so surprised if he had spoken to the blonde instead of just launching a fireball at him, but that was neither here nor there. I guess, Naruto said before falling silent. He didn't feel inclined to give any more information than that. Not only would doing so not help with the situation, but it was giving away knowledge about himself to someone who might become an enemy sometime in the future, regardless of whether or not they live together. All thoughts were driven from his mind in short order when Naruto felt a familiar surge of chakra. While he may not have the incredible sensor abilities of an Uzumaki, long life and constant use of Saninmo had given him a very basic grasp on detecting chakra when it was being used. Move. He shouted to the fire user, who looked at him in surprise for a moment before his eyes widened. Both he and Naruto jumped away just as a large bolt of lightning struck the ground where they had been standing. Naruto reached into his pouch, and with the speed of one who had gone through the motions a million times, pulled out a pair of kunai. As he landed on the ground, the blonde crouched low, the hands holding his kunai crossed in front of him in a gesture of preparedness as he searched for his attacker. It didn't take long to find them. The three weren't doing anything to hide their presence as they strode forward. It was the two lightning twins from before, wearing their typical bondage costumes, and a male who Naruto suspected was their Ashikabi. He was a lean, brown-haired man of average height with a gruff, wild look to him. He looked fairly average, with clothing that consisted of a white undershirt with a pair of jeans. However, while most people would have dismissed him, Naruto narrowed his eyes. Was this man also seeking the green girl? Naruto wondered. Just how many people were after Kusano? Well, whatever the case was, if this man really was after number 108, then he would need to end this quickly. Well, look at this, another Ashikabi, the man drawled out in what Naruto thought sounded like amusement. He had his hands in his pockets and stood in a casual stance as he leered at the blonde. Naruto didn't let the look bother him, already prepared with several possible attacks to either incapacitate or kill all three of the figures standing before him. Come to find the green girl too. You weren't the ones responsible for the destruction of the front gate, Naruto stated, his eyes narrowed as he tried to calculate how long it would take to defeat these three, though he would prefer not fighting at all. The Ashikabi's eyebrows rose. So sure about that, are you? What makes you think I wasn't the one who did that, little ninja? Naruto's eyebrows twitched violently at the mocking reference to his current outfit, most likely his mask. His fingers twitched, but he didn't react otherwise. Because those ATVs were cut, he gestured to the twins behind the scruffy-looking male. And I already know that those two use lightning. Lightning was an element used for piercing, not cutting. Even the Rikiri, Kakashi-sensei's infamous lightning blade, didn't actually cut like its namesake suggested. And since Sekirei only had one power, there was no way these two could have any kind of cutting ability. The man raised another eyebrow at the blonde's words, seemingly finding some amusement in them. However, it was the brasher of the two twins, Hikari, who spoke. She pointed at the blonde with an angry look on her face as she shouted, "Wait a second. How the hell do you know about our powers?" "How I know isn't really relevant at the moment, now is it?" Naruto said with an almost questioning tone of voice. "The fact remains I know that you three were not responsible for the damage at the front gate, which means that there is another Sekirei somewhere in here already making their way to Kisano. Speaking of that other Sekirei, it might have been a good idea to have at least tried to grill the fire user on details about 43's powers." He had been so overwhelmed with worry that the blonde had simply forgotten to ask. Once again Naruto found himself getting annoyed at himself. Not only was he getting so worked up over something that normally wouldn't have caused him to bat an eyelash at just a little under a week ago, but his haste and the overwhelming emotions smashing against him with all the subtlety of a battering ram seemed to be pushing his analytical mind to the side. Already he had made several of the most basic rookie mistakes when it came to missions of this nature, not being prepared, leaving his back exposed to a potential enemy, not taking in his surrounding to ensure he would not be ambushed, and not learning every facet of information possible so that he could make the most informed decisions. Naruto could only hope this strange phenomenon would settle down, so he could once again think properly. "Boy!" Hikari shouted, her pointed finger now quivering with rage as she glared at him. "Now you listen here, punk. You either tell me how you know about mine and my sister's powers, or I'll zap your ass right here." Naruto could have made any number of responses to that demand, anything from snappy comebacks to simply launching himself at the Sekirei, and beginning what would most likely be a battle to the death. Fortunately, he had to do none of those things, for a large fireball was launched at the twins, forcing them to jump out of the way and take their Ashikabi with them. A second later Homura jumped down from his perch and landed on the ground next to Naruto. The blonde was actually quite surprised to see the man still here. He had expected the fire user to have ditched him and left to go find Kusano. Perhaps the man had decided that he was being sincere in his desire to rescue the little girl, or maybe the male Sakurai simply changed his stance, now that he knew number 108 was reacting to him. Either way, Naruto was grateful for the assist. He wasn't sure he could be two elementalists with nothing more than taijutsu. At least, not if he wanted to rescue Kusano in time. Hamura. The other sister, Hibiki, Naruto remembered, stuttered in surprise. The blonde raised his eyebrow at the recognition that had appeared on the pair's faces. It seemed that these three were acquainted with each other in some way. Hikari and Hibiki, and their Ashikabi Seo, the newly minted Hamura stated casually, a ball of fire appearing above his hand. It seems you two just haven't learned your lesson. Not only are you going after unwinged Sakurai, but now you've decided to go after a little girl who's technically not even supposed to have been released from the labs yet. No, now wait just a minute, Hamura, Hibiki stated anxiously. There was fear evident in her eyes that made Naruto glance over at his partner speculatively. If these two were afraid of him, then it likely meant Hamura was either more powerful than both of them combined, or had more experience when it came to combat. Given the man's title of Guardian of Unwinged Sakurai that he had heard being bandied about, it was probably both. You've got it all wrong. We're not here to defeat the green girl. Oh? Hamura narrowed his eyes. Then just why are you here? Ah, well, you see. Hibiki started, however. In that second Naruto stopped paying attention. Wani-chan. The scream of a little girl forced its way into his mind. Kusano was scared, terrified even. Her fear was coursing through his veins, and for a moment, he was the little girl, watching with wide eyes as someone stalked up to him. And even as the feeling began to fade, Kusano's fear was quickly replaced by Naruto's own fear. Fear that he might be too late in helping her. Oi! Hamura shouted at the masked shinobi, who was no longer paying attention to anything around him, in worry. Naruto's entire body had gone stiff, his eyes darting frantically from side to side as they widened in fear. Are you alright? He asked when his partner didn't respond. Naruto didn't answer. The feeling of fear that had been fading was increasing, Kusano's fear mixing with his own. Wherever she was in scared and most likely in danger. Whatever feelings he may have had, whatever reluctance he might have still possessed about getting himself even more involved with the Sakurai plan, might have been thrown out the window. Nothing else mattered more right now than getting to Kusano and saving her from whatever it was that had caused such fear. Without a word, without a warning, Naruto spun on a dime, his legs bent, his chakra surged, and in a rupture of movement, the masked shinobi blasted off the ground, the earth underneath him exploding and gouging out two craters where his feet had been. What the hell? Naruto only absently noted the shocked shouts coming from 4 different voices as he was propelled through the air. Landing on a branch, he crouched down for barely a moment, before with another chakra-propelled leap, he soared through the air and onto the next branch. There was a reason Konoha shinobi preferred using the trees to transport themselves as opposed to running. Well, part of the reason was that it helped them remain hidden when on a mission into enemy territory. After all, very few people, ninja included, thought to look up. The other, larger reason was because of how fast one could travel when jumping from tree branch to tree branch. With the right amount of timing and the correct application of chakra, one could propel themselves through the air at a rate faster than any modern-day car could hope to travel, by using the chakra and momentum derived from the act of pushing off each tree to increase their speed. It was an art that had been perfected by the ninja of Konohagakure, and one they had used to great effect during the many wars that had plagued the elemental nations. That was what Naruto was doing right now. No longer even caring who saw him, the blonde leapt through the sea of trees at speeds that gave the phase breakneck speeds a whole new meaning. He flew through the forest, a mere blur to anyone who might have seen him. Adrenaline was pumping through his veins. Combined with his chakra, it enhanced his already phenomenal inhuman reflexes, far beyond what even most shinobi in his day and age could have accomplished. He could feel her. Kusano was getting more frantic with each second that ticked by. Wherever she was scared, and that fear was increasing his own fear by the second. He increased his speed, pushing his body and chakra to the max, feeling his muscles strain as he moved, hearing the harsh sound of his breathing, accompanied by the almost audible pumping of blood to his veins. Whether by design of an unconscious act made manifest, Kusano began directing him, not just with her feelings either. Even though the sights around him looked like nothing more than a blur, he could see the girl he had come here for, her ghostly image floating before him, showing him where to go. Finally, as Naruto cleared one last branch and landed in what looked like the heart of the forest, the sound of a voice, the same voice he had heard in his dreams and just a few seconds ago shouting in his mind. Stop. No. Came the warbled cry of terror from a scared little girl. The girl's shout of terror was followed by another voice. I promised my master I would bring you back in one piece, you stubborn little brat. The voice was female, older, and if Naruto was a betting man, he would have said the person was this Sakurai number 43 that Hamura had mentioned. A thump sounded from where the voices were coming from, and Naruto turned to corner in time to see the pair, as he heard the next part of the woman's speech. But if you're going to be like this, maybe it would be better if I just brought you back in pieces instead. Naruto grit his teeth, the fear that had been fueling him until now changed to white-hot anger. Once again reacting without giving a moment's thought, the blonde shinobi bum rushed the woman and body checked her from the side. With a cry of both surprise and pain, the woman was thrown away violently, her body moving with incredible speed as it impacted against a tree several feet away. Naruto stood there, his breathing harsh in his ears as he panted due more to his own rage than any real shortness of breath. That is, until a gasp from his left alerted him to the whole reason he had rushed here in the first place. Turning, Naruto saw the little blonde girl from his dreams staring up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Winnie-chan," she whispered, her tone reflecting the look on her face. The blonde was honestly surprised when he heard Kusano call him that. He had called himself that when speaking to her in his dreams, more as a way to help the little girl feel at ease than any other reason. Children always felt more relaxed around familial figures. That she had not only called him that, but also seemed to know it was him despite the mask he was wearing was shocking. Of course, there was a possibility that her reacting to him meant she could tell who he was due to the beginning forms of their bond. Perhaps Sakurai somehow managed to imprint the person they were reacting to in their psyche or something. It would explain how she recognized him so easily. None of that really mattered now, and so as Naruto dropped down to his knees and pulled off his mask to reveal his face and the spiky mop of his golden blonde hair, he put any thoughts and theories out of his mind. "That's right, Ku-chan. It's me," he said, a relieved smile on his face. That seemed to be all the encouragement Kusano needed. With a cry of "Winnie-chan," the little girl launched herself at him. Naruto wrapped his arms around her as the tiny blonde buried her face in his chest and began to cry in earnest. Ku-chan was so scared, she spoke in between her crying. It was somewhat difficult to make out her muffled voice as she stained his shirt with her tears. That mean lady was the one who hurt Takami-ni. She wanted to steal Ku-chan away from Winnie-chan. "It's alright now," Naruto said as one hand reached up and began to stroke the girl's hair, as a strange sense of calm came over him. It was strange, he reflected in a moment's clarity. He could not remember the last time he had actually interacted with children before. A long, long time. But even if it had been thousands of years since the last time Naruto had dealt with children, a part of him still knew how to take care of a child. He was running on instincts now, memories long forgotten helping guide his words and movements. Everything's going to be alright. Ku-chan no longer has to feel frightened anymore. The little girl sniffed and hiccuped, but her crying soon decreased. Her tiny hands clutched at his shirt as she tried to bury her face into his chest even further. A moment in which Naruto felt strangely at peace in a way he had only begun to feel recently with his Sakurai, was ruined by the sound of an obnoxious voice shouting at him. "You insolent dog." Naruto turned as Kusano stiffened in his arms. He looked over at the girl he had launched into the tree, taking in her appearance now that he was no longer filled with inconsolable rage. The girl had long brown hair that was tied together in the back by a black ribbon and brown eyes. She was wearing a black and white dress with puffed out sleeves and a length that reached her mid-thigh. Her legs were covered in a pair of black stockings and high-heeled shoes. Her outfit was finished by a pair of black gloves. Perhaps the most telling thing about her, however, was the large scythe she was wielding, with a black handle and a blade that gleamed wickedly in the darkness of the forest. Naruto judged the blade to be about 3 feet in length. It was the weapon in her hand that confirmed in his mind that this was the girl who had destroyed the gate and attacked the guards. "How dare you interfere with the business of my Ashikabi?" The girl continued to screech at him. Naruto would have winced at the way her octaves seemed to rise to near glass-shattering levels, but his mind was already moving into a state of being he had long forgotten existed. His mind became coldly analytical, possibilities and variables sprang through his mind for how best to fight this new opponent at Hiraishin-like speeds. No longer was Naruto's mind that of the cynical wonder, nor that of the confused man who had just found himself bonded to several Sakurai without a clue on his overly emotional state. Now what stood in the place of those two people was the man who had fought in the 4th Great Shinobi War, who had been trained by some of the best, who had been honed into a blade of incredible sharpness. Once more, Naruto became a shinobi. Winnie-chan. Naruto stiffened in surprise, and then cursed. In the face of this new enemy he had almost forgotten about Kusano. Letting his mask dissolve until he needed it, Naruto looked down at the young Sakurai still in his grip. "Ku-chan," he started in what he hoped was a soft voice. He released the girl from his grip and stood up. Kusano frowned a bit, but he just smiled and said, "I want you to do me a favor. Close your eyes, and by the time you open them I promise everything will be alright again, okay?" Kusano nodded her head eagerly, and obediently closed her eyes, even going a step further by covering her eyes with her hands to ensure she didn't open them. Naruto's smile dissolved a second later as if it had never existed. He moved in front of Kusano, protecting her from the Sakurai standing before him. "You really think you can stand up to me?" Number 43 looked like she didn't know whether to laugh or to feel insulted. After a moment she seemed to settle on insulted, gave the blonde a disdainful sneer. "Arrogant human. After I cut you up, I'm going to be taking that little brat to my Ashikabi. She smiled coldly. After I punish her for not heeding my words, of course. Beside him, Kusano stiffened, and Naruto didn't need to see her to feel her fear as it was already affecting him, even though they had not completed their bond. There were a dozen things he could have said to that, and were Naruto more like his old self, before his curse, before even the war, he might have said something. Perhaps something along the lines of how he was going to kick her ass, or maybe how she should give up before he had to hurt her. Naruto had been altruistic like that. But that was then, back when he had been but a child, a boy who held on to the naive belief that good always triumphed, and that people could learn to understand one another with words alone. Now he knew better, good didn't always win, evil could never truly be destroyed, and people would never understand each other. This Naruto didn't speak, instead he just acted. With blurred movements quicker than the human eye could follow, his hands reached into his pouches, pulling out a pair of kunai and launching them at the woman. From the whitening of her eyes it was clear she was surprised, though if that was due to the speed at which she had thrown the kunai or audacity, that an arrogant human was attacking her was unknown. It didn't really matter in the end, and so Naruto put it out of his mind. He had to hand it to the girl, she was very quick to respond. His blades had been thrown at roughly 120 miles per hour, far too fast for any ordinary human to react to. The girl had managed to get her scythe up in time to deflect the two projectiles that had been aimed at her head, the weapons clanging off the steel of her blade. It was impressive all things considered, and just went to show him how powerful these Sekirei were. However, the kunai themselves were nothing more than a feint, a mere probe that he had used to judge her timing and reflexes as he rushed forward. He had already determined the best course of action to win this battle. When normally fighting a scythe user, or anyone who specialized in using close-range weaponry, the safest bet was fighting from a distance by using projectile weapons and long-range ninjutsu. Naruto couldn't do that right now, not only because using ninjutsu would damage the surroundings and possibly harm Kusano, but also because of the other people who were also in the forest. It would only be a matter of time before Homura, the lightning twins, and that Seo character stumbled upon them, and he didn't want to have to explain away any possible scorch marks, fallen trees, and upturned mounds of earth. That left Naruto with one option, close-range combat. Taijutsu was out of the question, this girl was wielding a scythe, one that was apparently sharp enough to slice through an ATV. While losing a limb would not be debilitating in any way, he didn't want to have Kusano open her eyes to the sight of blood covering his body. Kunai were equally out. While it was possible for some skilled ninja to fight a swordsman with a kunai, a scythe was a different story altogether. Due to the curve and length of the scythe's blade, it was nearly impossible to truly block a scythe with nothing more than a kunai, and while it was possible to dodge the blow then counterattack, that kind of action was a lot harder than it looked. Hidan had proven that. That meant he needed to use a weapon that had a good length, and would be capable of blocking large-bladed weapons with ease. Fortunately, he had one such weapon, one of the few he kept on him at all times due to nostalgia. Without slowing down his movements, Naruto held his hands together, the left one under the right one. Were he not wearing gloves, anyone looking would have been able to see the glow of a pair of seals, before a puff of smoke covered his hands, and a good portion of the air in front of him. The smoke didn't last long as the blonde charged through the smoke, dispersing it. In his once empty hands there was now a sword, a massive blade that was almost as tall as Naruto. The blade itself had two cutouts, a circle close to the top and a semicircular one nearer the handle, that aptly fit the sword's purpose of decapitation. The latter notch allowed a strap to be wrapped around the weapon, making it easier for the user to carry. Its extremely long handle was also detachable to further aid transportation, and then reattached when required for combat. It was a weapon that had once been used by the former Kirigakure no Kijin, the demon of the hidden mist, Mamachi Zabuza. The Kubikirabacho, the infamous decapitating carving knife. In the time it took Naruto to summon the weapon and rush over to number 43, said Sekirei had only just begun to lower her scythe from her face, after having deflected the two kunai aimed at her head. The way her eyes whitened in fear was almost satisfying to Naruto, who would admit that a part of him wanted her to know that same fear she had given to Kusano. The scythe wielder barely had time to react, lifting her scythe to once more defend herself, before Naruto was on her. Naruto's first attack was a swing that came in wide from the left and below in an upward curve that would vivisect the woman from her left hip to right shoulder. Despite having been swung from all the way behind him in a wide arc, the blade moved at blurring speeds. It struck his opponent's scythe, the blow so powerful that the death scythe was knocked away from the woman's body. Surprisingly enough, Naruto noted that the attack, which would have normally been enough to not only knock the weapon out of a normal human's hand, but also had enough power to jar and numb the appendages holding it, did nothing more than force the blade away from the woman's body. The strength of a Sekirei was powerful indeed. As the scythe-wielding woman stumbled backwards, Naruto pivoted on his left foot, spinning around in a clockwise circle, and using the momentum of the blade to increase its rotation, and therefore its cutting power as he brought it down on the girl's head. In a clear testament to the enhanced abilities that all Sakurai seemed to possess to some degree, number 43 managed to move out of the way of the descending blade in time to survive with nothing more than a slight injury on her shoulder. She had jumped back and to the right, an instinctive action Naruto noted, that forced the blade to move past her. Had she gone to the left, his attack would have likely sheared off the arm, rather than simply cut into the shoulder. Despite himself, Naruto was slightly impressed by number 43's combat abilities, or at least her reflexes. While not as fast as Musubi, and certainly nowhere near the power he had seen being displayed by Miya, the side wielding had definitely had that inherent Sakurai prowess. Despite her having what amounted to the genetic strength of her people, or whatever strength she had been granted by MBI's genetic manipulation, Naruto still didn't know what Sakurai were, after all. It soon became clear that while she may have the abilities of her people, the girl before him was no warrior. Naruto didn't give her enough time to recover as he once more charged the scythe-wielding girl. With Kubikira Bacho in hand, he began attacking her with a powerful combination of wide swings that became increasingly faster as time went on. Naruto used his natural strength, enhanced by the power of chakra flowing through his body, and combined it with the increasing momentum derived from his swings, to noticeably increase the speed of his attacks. Each swing of his blade blended into the next, a constant whirling movement as Naruto pivoted and pirouetted, all the while driving number 43 back. Had there been anyone around to witness the events, or had Kusano opened her eyes and watched him, all anyone would see of Naruto was the constant whirl of his blade and body, as he relentlessly drove the scythe-wielder into a corner. Naruto became a living maelstrom. The girl, number 43, did her best to keep herself alive. Her eyes were wide as she tried blocking the blonde's forceful attacks. However, while the scythe-wielder had power and raw talent, it was clear that she was inexperienced in the ways of combat. Rather than use her scythe in a way that would allow her to redirect the giant cleaving knife away from her and force its momentum so she could launch her counterattack, she took each blow head-on, stumbling backwards with each and every step as the power behind each swing became more and more forceful. Her legs began to buckle as she was driven into the ground by the relentless assault. Her arms became like lead as they finally began to go numb under the powerful swings of the Kubikira Bacho. Finally, after one last incredible swing, a downward stroke that clanged on number 43's feebly raised scythe, the girl was forced to the ground, her weapon falling to the earth in front of her. Naruto raised his blade, preparing to finish her off. He paused, however, a brief moment of hesitation as he saw the pure, undiluted fear in the girl's eyes. Those were not the eyes of a warrior, of someone who knew that battle and death often went hand in hand, but a young girl who realized she was in way over her head. It forced him to pause, to hesitate. Naruto was no stranger to battle, and death was quite possibly his closest companion. He had killed many times, hundreds, thousands, millions of people throughout his life. However, in all that time, the one thing Naruto had never done was take the life of an innocent. At least, not consciously. But could this girl really be called an innocent? The very term implied a lack of guilt in respect to any kind of crime, sin, or wrongdoing. This girl had just killed at least 24 soldiers, destroyed 5 apps, and broke into the Arboretum with the intention of kidnapping an innocent girl and delivering said girl to her Ashikabi in order to be forcibly winged. Those were not the actions of an innocent. Yet the girl's face as she looked at him, that look of utter terror, the scent of fear she exuded, it was the same look he had seen on innocent men and women when they were about to be killed. And so he hesitated, and that cost him. No? Number 43 screamed, the sound once more reminding Naruto that he had to finish off his opponent. Before he had the chance, the girl had once more managed to get a hold of her scythe. From her position, she swung the bladed weapon and, much to the blonde's surprise, released a stream of what looked like a wind blade at his face. Naruto was forced to quickly dodge to the side, not entirely able to escape the technique entirely, he noted as he felt the searing heat of his cheek getting cut open. It didn't matter, however, even as the blonde felt blood trickling down his open wound, he felt that same wound closing near instantaneously. In the time it took for him to dodge the attack, number 43 had scrambled to her feet and once more swung her blade haphazardly. No, 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 no. She shrieked as she launched wind blade after wind blade at him in quick succession, with no real rhyme or reason. Get away, get away, get away. Stay away from me. TCH, Naruto grunted as he forced chakra to the bottom of his feet in order to increase his speed. The chakra helped propel him away from the wind blades that were now tracking him, as number 43 followed his movements. The ground in front of the girl was sliced open, trenches formed into the earth as her attack sliced apart the ground and flew towards him. Each attack missed, and with each miss the trees around him were torn cut deeply into. A whimper when one of the blades got too close to Kusano let him know that the girl was still there, her eyes still closed, even as one wind blade got too close to her for comfort. Naruto narrowed his eyes. It was time to end this. Taking one hand off his blade, Naruto created a single-handed ram seal in order to utilize the shunin, or body flicker, a high-speed movement technique that allowed a ninja to move short or long distances at near untraceable speed. To the casual observer it would appear as if they had teleported. It was not normally a viable jutsu, a ninja technique, for use in combat. Only a few people like Shinsui of the Body Flicker had been capable of using the basic D-rank movement technique to its full potential in a combat situation, and that was partially because of his Sharingan eyes, and partially because he had practiced with it for years to get to that level. While Naruto laid no claim to being that good with the jutsu, having rarely ever used it, he was used to moving at high speeds, thanks to other jutsu he had at one point after mastering Kurama's chakra. He was more than capable of retaining full attention to detail, even while moving at high speeds, and thus, the Shunshin became a viable option for him to use well in combat. With a short burst of chakra, Naruto disappeared within a swirl of leaves, utilizing the leaf body flicker version created by Konoha to reappear right next to number 43, his blade already swinging to decapitate the girl as its namesake suggested it was for. It was only at the last second, when he once more saw the fear evident in the girl's eyes, that he changed his course of action from kill to incapacitate. He reasoned with himself that it was for Kusano. He didn't want the girl to see him covered in the blood of his enemy. He refused to believe that it had anything to do with simply not wanting the last thing he saw from this girl to be her scared face as he cut her head off. With a grimace, Naruto rotated his hands, shifting the blade, so that rather than the sharp edge being pointed at number 43 when it connected, it was the flat of the blade that struck the scythe wielder. There was a resounding smack as steel met flesh, followed by a loud crunch as number 43's nose broke under the assault of his blow. This too was soon followed by the girl he had hit being sent into the air as she flew backwards. Even though Naruto had no longer been using his chakra to enhance his blows at this point, he still had the momentum his swing had already accumulated to increase its power. The scythe fell out of the girl's hand, landing blade first in the ground several feet away, and the girl herself continued soaring for several more feet before she struck the earth hard, rolling and tumbling like a rag doll, before coming to a stop lying on her side against one of the large trees. Naruto was at her side in an instant as he once more used the Shunshin to close distance with her, his blade already prepared to strike again if she got up. However, all the girl did was quiver as her body struggled to retain consciousness. With one final shudder, number 43 murmured, "Master," in a desperate voice, as if hoping her Ashikabi would somehow hear her and come to the rescue, before all her movements ceased. Naruto stayed where he was for a moment, wanting to make sure she wasn't faking it, and would get up to strike the moment his back was turned. He had already made too many mistakes on this mission, and refused to make another rookie error that could cost him. However, the girl didn't move. All that happened was a slight glow came from her back before it disappeared again. With a frown on his face, Naruto stuck his large head-cleaving blade into the ground, knelt down and put 2 fingers on the girl's neck. He felt her pulse. It was slow, very slow. No human could survive with the pulse moving that slowly, and for a moment Naruto wondered if she was in some kind of hibernation. Bringing his hands together and formed a set of 3 hand seals, his left hand glowing green as he activated the medical jutsu, one of the few he could actually do. It was nothing more than a basic scanning jutsu, used to scan and diagnose a person for injuries and sicknesses. Naruto brought his hands to the girl, stopping when he was just a few inches from touching her, and slowly moved it down her body. Broken nose. Severe concussion. The first through 5th cervical bones of the spinal column had suffered extreme whiplash. Her neck had almost been broken when he smacked her in the face with Kubikira Bacho. Her arms and legs were under extreme duress, the muscles having suffered from the brutal assault he had launched at her. Other than that, there was no serious damage done to her. In short order, she had taken a beating but would survive, provided she received medical attention within 24 hours. With his diagnosis done, the glow covering Naruto's hand disappeared. Now that he knew she was not going to be getting up anytime soon, he let his curiosity get the better of him. He turned her over slightly onto her front, grabbed the back of her dress and tore it down, so he could look at the spot that had been glowing a few seconds ago. There was nothing there, he noted. The skin was unmarred. How strange. Number 43 had called for her master just before she lost herself fully to unconsciousness, and the glow appeared, which meant she had an Ashikabi. Shouldn't that mean she should have had that Sakurai crest as well? Both Musubi and Akitsu had gained their crests when he winged them, and that was a requirement in order to gain an Ashikabi, right? So what had happened? Had the crest disappeared after her defeat? What did that mean? Was it in some way significant? Perhaps it was used to signify a Sakurai's defeat. If that was the case, then was the crest on their backs a natural phenomenon or something they had been given by MBI? He didn't know. He had no answers to those questions, and that was beginning to bother him. He would need those answers if he was going to figure out just what the hell he had gotten himself into. Oni-chan. At the sound of the small voice, Naruto swore. With all the excitement, he had completely forgotten that Kusano was still here. Standing up, the blonde grabbed the Kubikira Bacho and sealed it back inside of the seal on his hands, then made his way over to where the little girl was still waiting for him. His need for answers could wait. For now at least, he could be secure in the knowledge that whatever his thoughts were, whatever his feelings were, he had at least managed to complete his mission to save Kusano. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.